I retired 7 years ago. I was 58. And if you're watching this wondering whether this is the year you finally do it, I want to tell you what I wish someone had told me back then. Because I almost didn't pull the trigger. I had the money, I had the plan, but I still hesitated. And now, looking back from the other side at 65, I can tell you 3 things that should tell you you're ready, and 3 things that are probably holding you back that shouldn't be. Let me start with the first one, and it's a way of thinking about retirement that completely changed my perspective. When I was getting close to leaving my job, I kept hearing the same word over and over, retirement. And it sounded like an ending, like I was being put out to pasture. I'd spent 35 years at one company, started as a young engineer on the shop floor, worked my way up to running operations across multiple plants. That was my identity. So the idea of retiring felt like I was giving that up and getting nothing in return. But then I started thinking about it differently. I started thinking about it more like a renaissance. And I don't mean that in some cheesy motivational poster way. Think about what the actual renaissance was. It was a rebirth. After centuries of stagnation, people suddenly had 3 things at the same time: the resources, the freedom, and the time. And when those 3 things lined up, incredible things happened. That's exactly where a lot of us are right now. We've accumulated resources through decades of work. We've got technology and tools that our parents never dreamed of. And for the first time, we get to choose how to spend our time and attention. That combination is rare. It doesn't last forever. And I genuinely believe more people need to see retirement not as a closing chapter, but as the beginning of something entirely new. For me, it was getting into woodworking seriously for the first time. Linda and I started traveling in a way we never could when I was working. I started reading again, cooking, actually being present for my kids as adults. It wasn't about going backwards. It was about moving forward in a direction I got to choose. But I know what you're thinking right now. That all sounds nice, Robert, but what about the money? Fair enough. Let me talk about the second reason this is the year to do it. And it's actually the biggest barrier I see stopping people. I call it the spending paradox. Here's what happened to me. I spent 35 years being disciplined. I maxed out my 401k from day one. Every raise I got, I funneled into investments. I let compound growth do the heavy lifting. And by the time I was ready to leave, the numbers were clear. I could do it. But here's the paradox. After 35 years of saving, I couldn't bring myself to start spending. It felt wrong, like I was undoing everything I'd worked for. And I've talked to a lot of people who feel exactly the same way. But here's what the data actually shows. About 2/3 of retirees who follow a standard withdrawal approach end up with more money than they started with. Not less, more. That blew my mind when I first heard it. Now, you might be thinking, well, my situation is different. My expenses might be higher, and that's fair. But here's something that helped me and Linda a lot when we were planning. Instead of thinking about retirement expenses as one flat number that goes up every year forever, think about them more like a smile. At the beginning of retirement, those are the go-go years. That's when you've got the energy and the health to travel, to do the big things. Expenses are higher. Then you move into what I'd call the slow-go years. You're more content staying closer to home. Maybe you're not taking 3 trips a year anymore. Expenses come down. And then later you might see medical costs go up. That's the other end of the smile. When Linda and I sat down and actually separated our needs from our wants, it changed everything. The needs are the essentials. Housing, food, insurance, transportation. Those go up with inflation and they're predictable. The wants are things like travel, helping the kids with a wedding, maybe a new workshop project. Those are real, but they don't last forever. And then you plan for the what-ifs. Medical costs later in life, long-term care, that sort of thing. When you lay it out that way, it's almost always less than you feared. The spending paradox is real, but once you see the actual shape of your retirement expenses, it loses its power over you. Now let me get to the third reason to retire this year, and this one is personal for me. A few years before I retired, I watched my father's health decline. He worked until he was 67. He'd always said he'd travel when he retired. He and my mother had plans. But by the time he stopped working, his body had other ideas. He had about 2 good years before things got difficult. And I remember thinking, I am not going to let that happen to me. There's a difference between lifespan and health span. Lifespan is how long you live. Health span is how long you feel good. And that number is a lot shorter than most people think. The average is somewhere around 64. That means for a lot of people, by the time they retire at 65 or 67, the best years are already behind them. I made a decision. I was going to retire while I still had the energy to do something with it. and I was going to make health a central part of my retirement. Not in some obsessive way, but with intention. I started strength training 3 mornings a week. Linda and I walk every afternoon. I started paying attention to what I eat, actually cooking real meals instead of grabbing whatever was fast. I read in the mornings. I see friends regularly. A buddy of mine, he started calling it the magic triangle. When you're young, you've got time and health but no money. In the middle of your career, you've got money and health but no time. And in retirement, you've got time and money but your health starts to slip. But there's this sweet spot, this window, where all three overlap. That's the moment. And for a lot of people watching this, that moment might be right now. The question isn't really, can I afford to retire? It's, can I afford to wait? Almost every retired person I've talked to says the same thing. Do it sooner than you think. Now, I know there's something else on your mind, because it was on mine 7 years ago too. It's the uncertainty, the economy, inflation, wars, AI changing everything, political tension. It feels like there's always a reason to wait for things to calm down. But here's what I've realized after 7 years on this side of retirement. There is never a calm moment. I retired in my late 50s, and since then we've had a global pandemic, an inflation spike, a banking scare, and about a dozen other things that were supposed to be catastrophic. And you know what? I'm fine. My plan held up. Not because I predicted any of those things, but because the plan was built to handle uncertainty. Think about it like building a house. You can't control the weather, but you can build a house that's strong enough to handle the storm. When I set up my retirement income, I made sure I had several years' worth of conservative, stable money set aside. Money I wouldn't need to touch no matter what the market did. So when March 2020 hit and everything was falling apart, I didn't panic. I didn't have to sell anything at the bottom. I just waited. A friend of mine wasn't so lucky. She just retired and she saw her accounts dropping and she was convinced she'd made the worst decision of her life. But when she actually looked at her plan, she had years of conservative reserves. She didn't need the market to recover tomorrow. She just needed it to recover eventually. And it did. It always does. If you look at history, there's always been a reason not to retire. The financial crisis, the debt ceiling, Brexit, the pandemic, wars, oil crises going back to the 1970s, the Cold War. Every single year there's something. But people who had solid plans retired during all of those periods, and they're still doing fine. A friend once told me something that stuck with me. He said, "I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which never happened." And he was right. Uncertainty isn't a flaw in the system. It's just how the system works. The only thing that changes is what the specific worry is. So if you're sitting there thinking this might be the year, let me tell you what I know from experience. The money part is solvable. The health part has a deadline, and the uncertainty part is never going away. The real risk isn't retiring into an imperfect world. The real risk is waiting for a perfect one that never comes. I'm Robert Martin. I'm 65 years old. I retired 7 years ago, and it was the best decision I ever made. Not because everything went perfectly, but because I gave myself the time to build the life I actually wanted.